Well, hello everyone, and welcome to Painless Universal, a conversation with myself and Welsh. Today's conversation is extremely special to me because it's all about storytelling. At Painless Universal, one of our focuses is to tell stories, and hopefully, you find joy by listening to one of our stories and get inspired that there is always hope at the end of the tunnel. Sometimes we don't see it, we don't believe it because we've worked so hard and we don't know that it is just there. But hopefully, by listening to some of these wonderful stories, you're able to get the inspiration you deserve and need to get through each day. My guest today, Shavan Curtis. She'll be telling us her own journey of the revolution of Iran and why she wrote her memoir. She was also a storyteller. She teaches this in school, but let me tell you a little bit about her. Shavan Curtis is the author of My Persian Paradox, was born and raised in Tehran, experienced the Iranian Revolution in 1979 firsthand. In 2004, she immigrated to the United States, where she now works as a project analyst by day and a passionate writer all the time. What's fascinating about her is that she teaches memoir writing workshops and has been performing lectures to colleges and universities about her book and the concept of sharing stories. She actively practices a variety of storytelling workshops to help people develop deeper empathy towards each other. She is working on her second memoir about her life in the United States. She's written several articles and now lives in Virginia, United States, with her husband and two daughters. Her motto is, we all have a story to tell. Share your story, listen to others' story, create more empathy and love. I truly love this. And I am so excited to speak to Shabnam about her own journey, why she feels it's important that we all share our story and create love in everything we do. Meet Shavan Curtis. So hello everyone and welcome to Painless Universal Conversation with myself and Welsh. Today's conversation is really one that is truly close to my heart. Now, I've grown up in this country in the United Kingdom, and I've had so many friends from Iran and around the world. And across the world, you always hear different stories. And our special guest today, Shaban, as I said in my introduction, she'll be telling us about her own journey, why she decided to leave Iran to now live in the United States. And not just that, she's very focused about sharing your own story. I started Painless Universal so we could always have our conversation and share stories. So short stories of empathy, stories of going through pain but finding your joy. Let's listen to Shavan as she tells us her story. Shavan, how are you?
Oh, great. Thank you so much. Thanks for having me here,
I
Anne.
am super delighted because I love your whole theme about sharing your story. I think so many of people ask that question, why do we, why should we share our story? What is the meaning of sharing your story? I've heard, what is the benefit? I don't think my story will make a difference to someone. I don't think this, I'm too embarrassed. If I share my story, the memories comes back and I'm not happy about doing that. I don't want to relive that memory. And I keep emphasizing to them, yeah, you might be living that memory for a tiny bit, but you don't realize the difference you're making to someone else's life. Just that little difference. That before we go into all that hobby of yours, which is something, this work that you've really worked so hard to achieve, to encourage others, let's talk about you. Who are you?
Oh, thank you. Well, I was born and raised in Iran, like you mentioned, and I was 7 year old when the revolution happened in 1799. No, 1979.
1979.
No, I wasn't that
You
young.
reversed it. I love that. Don't worry.
um, and then when the revolution happened, there were a lot of unexpected changes in the country. at the moment of the revolution, many people wanted it to happen, but then when the dictatorship and the Islamic fundamentalists took it over, then the people were confused of like, this is not what we asked for. We come from one dictatorship to another one, even worse. And soon after, 1 year after that, the war between Iran and Iraq started. So this is a long story, as you know, but 7, 8 year old, a friend of ours, that I was in their house when I was 8 year old in the first night that the war started, was telling me how much I screamed that night. And she was really panicking because my parents weren't there in the beginning. So it was really difficult. And then it took me 31 years to actually gather everything together and be able to leave Iran, just because I wanted to have a different future for myself and my daughter. I was very young when I had my daughter, and it was important that the both of us, two women, I wanted a different future, and I couldn't see it in Iran, unfortunately. You
Mhm.
know, it's your motherland, but you can't see how you can grow there.
Yeah.
Um, and then I immigrated to the United States in 2004. um and within a few years, you think that, like, oh my god, I achieved that American dream. I have this respectable job, I have this little cute house, my daughter is here getting ready to college, I'm in a perfect relationship. And that's exactly when I felt the pain in my heart. And speaking of pain, it was so powerful that it couldn't let me enjoy life.
Mm.
And I was confused. I was like, why am I not grateful for everything I have? And that's when, a little soul searching and everything, I learned that I need to deal with the pain of the past, that reliving that you just mentioned, in order to process it. I did have to relive it a little bit, but in order to process it, to free from it, I really needed to go through it. And then I started feeling the connection with life a lot deeper. So
Wow.
that's basically, I want to say, who I am. That was a long answer.
No. That's really shocking. I mean, really powerful that you actually said you just said now that you wanted to relieve that pain of your past. You wanted to go back and figure out yourself because that leads me on to my next question because one of the things you're really focused on is that word empathy, and you use empathy and sympathy towards others. How did your views from this come from your past of living in Iran and seeing all that was going on? And also, man, now coming to the United States, seeing that people were just taking life so for granted that, you come to a place where things that you had to think about before in Iran, and there you really really see what true pain is, in everyday aspect of life where you're really under a certain condition. But now you're in the United States, did your views for empathy and sympathy come from there?
I love that question because it has so many dimensions. I lived, I grew up in a culture that always, like Persian culture, always encourage you to help other people. And then I came to the United States and I saw it very differently. I got to know, like, how much volunteer job and helping other people is important in this culture. But then you get to the point that, like, what I'm doing, is it beneficial or not, or is it just for the sake of helping people? Is
Mhm.
it that the difference between sympathy and empathy?
Yeah.
Am I just helping people by looking at them from the top, that, oh, poor people, or am I really feeling their pain, and am I feeling the empathy? And then I started writing my book, and each character came, I had to understand each character in my book, and they're real characters, right? They're real people in life: my mother, my father, my aunt, myself. And I see Oh wow, yes, my father maybe he had his ideology. He was alcoholic. He became violent. But at the same time he was a father. He wanted to be a loving father. And that's why I chose the word paradox, because each one of us is a paradox. And when we get to see all these different dimensions of one person, that's when we feel the pain that they had, and that's when we feel that empathy, because we see why they did what they did.
Yes.
And that was to me really eye opening, and that's when I understood the deep meaning of empathy, that you can't just blame other people. They come from their own pain. Everyone has a story. Do I know her story? Do I know his story before I judge them?
I love that. It's true. And we don't know. And I think it's something you're doing it in such a wonderful place of the world, United States, where there's so much pain. Every day you hear the news, there's so much pain. But the way the pain is being viewed is probably different. And probably that's why there's not healing happening fast enough, because of the way people view things. Because I think you could talk about pain, but if you don't really practice what you talk about, the healing never happens. To heal from pain, you need to talk about it, share your story, which is something I love about your work, is that you're teaching people. It's not just to talk about it, but also to be free in your conversation, the way it's said. That goes on to my next question. You decided to write your memoir, your book, right? And you said, and you put everything out there about your own condition, growing up, and your own challenges. What was the reason you wrote The Persian Paradox?
Thank you. You know, it was at the moment that, I was, like I said, I was feeling that pain and that baggage. And I couldn't enjoy life because I couldn't connect, because I had everything I wanted, but I couldn't connect with life. But every time I shared my story with a friend, like in a safety net, in a small community, I started like, like friend from Midwest America or Canada, or how diverse it is here. People were like, "Oh my God, I really had that experience too." Or I could hear like, "Oh my God, I didn't know. I'm so sorry that you had to go through this."
Yeah.
But it eased it a little bit, that concept of sharing this story. And I
Mm.
got to the point that like not only we have a lot of universal experiences that we can actually help each other to understand better, our unique experiences also humanizes us. It's like that Persian girl there. But when you have a story and read this story, you get in touch with that Persian girl. And each one of us is different, but at the same time, we all experienced all those traumas, the revolution, the dictatorship, the war. Um, so that was basically what encouraged me to start writing the book. And from the moment I started, I knew I wanted to share it, because I really, not because it was an extraordinary story, because it was an ordinary story, a
Yeah.
story of an ordinary person who we don't hear, among all these marketing things. What about those, the ones that they don't have a voice? Can we talk about it?
Yeah.
Because our stories are building the whole society.
You said about the community all welcoming when you started talking, opening it up, and people started listening. What have you gained from people's insights since you started openly sharing your story and you've written the book? What's the reception been like?
um mostly very welcoming. I've had a few bad reviews, like, "Oh, this is very difficult to read. It's so painful. I don't want to read it." But then at the same time, those people aren't ready to read.
Mm.
At a lot of moments of my life, I'm not ready to read a painful story. So that's basically it. I don't take it personally, but that not taking it personally was the best um, outcome of this whole sharing my story, because what I learned was, us people in this world, we all have some type of pain in our heart.
Yes,
And
yes.
if we look at each other without judgment,
Mm.
like many people came to me, like this lady were like, oh my God, you shared this story of your divorce. I don't feel alone anymore. A lot of these little things, these little connections, and then you don't feel alone anymore. You see the pain in the people's heart, and then you feel like, who am I to judge other people? You start practicing seeing other people like a real person.
Yes, yes, yes. And I like what you just said. You said something about, when you share the pain of being, when you went through your divorce, because, a lot of people are very protective about that subject, especially if it depends what part of the world you're from. It's such a taboo subject to talk about because your parents, I'm originally from Africa and Nigeria, and my parents, if I have to go through anything like a divorce, that would be something my mom would not want to share with anyone. She'd be like, no, don't talk about it. But after I wrote my book, I noticed there's an openness towards her. And she realizes that holding things in is not always the best solution. It's not always so a best healing way. And you need to find, and people heal. Did you find that you were able to heal the traumas and things, even though you say your life has been ordinary? You might not know, so you might not have been, but have you been able to heal that pain of the past from writing your book?
I think, yeah, it was the beginning of the process. It's ongoing. It's like layer after layer, but the longer I work on it, the easier it becomes, because it seems like there is a learning curve how to deal with the pain of the past. And then once you get how to deal with it, each one that comes up, like those shadows that we have because of the pain of the past, then you feel more comfortable dealing with them. So, definitely a very great beginning to this process, and makes me hopeful, it encourages me that now every other pain that comes up, I can actually start working on it. I can see what the message is. I can dig down to see where the wound is. And that's more self compassion instead of beating ourselves up.
Yes. No, that's true. So in storytelling, now that you've done it, one of your specialty now is really focusing on others, helping others through their own story to learn to tell story. So storytelling can make, you said you talk about storytelling make a difference and bring different social connection in our everyday life. How have you seen storytelling making a huge difference and connecting more people to become more aware and more empathy into their in their daily lives?
You know, I started reading researches about like research studies about storytelling and how they actually release different type of hormones in your brain when you are listening to a story, and that creates that feeling of connection because people find themselves through stories. And
Mhm.
at the same time, I like that's the next plan. I'm working trying to help people, inspire people, encourage people to tell their stories in any way they want. They want to write it, they want to do a storytelling in any way they like to do it. But let's bring it to the dinner table because we humanize
Yeah,
everybody else.
yeah.
I was talking to a friend of ours, and we were talking about the memory of the war, and she said, "I don't understand why Iran is still helping Iraqi people." And then I told her about a story that I personally had meeting an Iraqi writer who is my age, and she lived in Baghdad, and she had the exact same experience as I did, watching the missile coming down and actually hitting a friend's house. So, what's the difference between me and her? Right? We are both human.
Yes.
How could I even hate those people? Because people didn't want to have this
Mm,
war.
yeah.
But then it changed the friend's mind that she was like, yeah, it wasn't about people, it was the government. The
Mm,
governments wanted to fight, but why people should hate each other? When we share these little stories, we humanize each other and the hate starts fading off.
yeah. Okay. I like to know about in the class because you do the teaching. It's really hard to get people to be because I've talked about empathy, I've talked about being more sympathetic, and I hear people using that word so often, and it's getting to the point where I'm saying, guys, understand what you're saying, just don't use it. How are you teaching people to really understand the word, not just to say it, but to understand the true meaning of what it is, especially in a country where everything is given to you? It's a world of full of opportunity. You don't need to be empathetic or sympathetic to anyone because I don't need your help. Think about, I don't need you to go to hospital. I don't need you for anything. I could be in my house and I don't need you. How do you teach a country to become more empathetic and sympathetic?
I love it. It's the questions that I ask when they start. When they bring the concept of the story in the first session, then it's the questions that I ask. Like this lady was from a country that, like many countries around the world, they didn't accept having a girl, and she was very proud of her daughter, who is now a successful woman, and she wanted to tell this story about her daughter. And she just simply said, I want to say this, like tell the story about my daughter because I'm very proud of her. So I started asking questions. I was like, how did your husband feel when you had a girl, when she was born? How did his family feel? And
Mm,
then she started connecting the dots, and I was like, and then she told me like her in-laws didn't actually, they reacted to having a girl like, no, you have to have a son. And then I started asking questions. Do you think, did they know better? How would they feel about themselves? And then she started connecting. So instead of blaming them, she just beautifully weaved this in the story that they didn't know better either, but that's how they treated me. They gave me hard time because I had a girl. So
mm,
it's like those questions that you start building up, helping to the person to build up the story, to see the narrative of the story differently,
yes, yes.
to see
No,
the people as real people with their own pain.
I love that. I love that. It's the narrative you build, and that is what helps you in the way you shape it. Now our final conversation with Shavan. Now, is in a world we live in a world. There's so much insight. There's so much opportunity. You've shared some wonderful insight about the opportunities of the world, the beauty of the, especially where you are right now, United States. There's so much beauty, and we're all looking for, especially after the pandemic changed our views of the world. We found that the world is not, people always thought, okay, you could just do this and that happens, it's so automatic. But we've now realized that the world is not within our control. So now we need to understand that we need to give more, we need to feel more love, more empathy. What wonderful news can you share with anyone who's out there looking to improve their own understanding, looking to share their story, but not really courageous enough, like you did, to share your story, but not knowing how to? What wonderful ways would you encourage them to go about and share their story, and also to, with the insight of the pandemic, still go out there and find love and be more empathetic to one another?
Sure. I hope I can, there's so much in my head I want to talk about. But one thing is, I heard, I've been listening to a lot of videos from Dr. Gabor Mate. He actually is studying and bringing the role of childhood traumas in our adulthood life, and like the impact of it. When we become adults, we have a lot of self-judgment in our heart. And we don't know, it has become a habit that we don't even realize we are doing it. And many of those disconnections are because of this self-judgment. So, little stories of trying to connect to people. Like if I feel not, if I feel anxiety this morning, I woke up, I feel anxiety, I haven't figured it out why. But isn't it better if I tell my husband, I feel anxiety and it's not anything between me and you? You know, just a little communications, just a little connections, and it helps him to understand my cranky way of dealing with life this morning. And also, it even maybe helps him to think, how can I help her? Can I just offer her a cup of coffee? Or maybe I can do that. Even if we don't, even if we are with people who cannot do the communication, like I'm a person, I can say it. But let's say my husband cannot, but I see it in his face because we just don't live with our words, we live with our body gestures. But if we read it in his face, that like maybe he didn't have a good night's sleep, can I offer a cup of coffee? Or simply, how are you feeling this morning? Those little things, without those self judgments, without those others judgments. Maybe it's about him, not about me. um, just connecting a little bit with empathy, and then let's see where it goes from there. A lot of time it goes actually to a very good place.
Yeah, no, that's very true. I realized before I mean that you go, you are writing a sequel for your book. And I was like, wow, she's just done the first one and now she's on to the second one. What should we expect from your second book before we let you go? And how different, because anyone who reads the first will get a lot about you and also understand their own importance of sharing their stories, the life you went through Iran, the revolution times, and how you went back to America. You talk openly about your divorce. I encourage everyone to go read it because I think it's such a very, very touching book. But your sequel coming out as well, which you're working on, what is that all about?
Sure. It's the process is a little slow. I want to say mid 2022 is probably a good time frame to expect it to be out. And it's mainly my life in America. It's focused on my life after the immigration, especially because as a mother, I had to, I had the choice was the choice that no mother-daughter be should have it. And we had to live separately for many years because of the cultural limitations, because of the law, because of the immigration law and everything. So it's kind of like as a role of a mother, an immigrant, a woman as an immigrant, a person of color. All those, I'm trying to bring them all together from basically my standpoint of coming from dictatorship to a, a working in progress democracy. And trying to I'm trying to know myself better so I can bring that into the book.
That's wonderful. Well, thank you so much for sharing your wonderful story. And I think the work you're doing, it can speak volume because you're just not sharing your story, but you're encouraging others to share their story, to find love and empathy and sympathy through their own stories. Thank you so much, Shavan, and I really hope the book goes well. It's been out for a while, but I really hope that people keep buying it because it's such an amazing story, and it's not just I don't even think it's just an amazing story. It also teaches you history as well about what went on. That for people who are curious minded and want to know more about the world, it's also a good book for that as well. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Thanks for having me here. It's a
As well.
pleasure.
Thank you.